The dog heard them first. That was always how it happened with Atlas. Not a bark, not a growl, not any of the theatrical warning signals that civilian dogs used when they sensed something wrong. Just a shift, a microscopic, total body recalibration that Lieutenant Commander Ryan Mercer had learned to read, the way a pilot read instrument panels. The Belgian Malinois' weight transferred forward onto his front paws. His ears, normally relaxed in the loose, mobile way of a working dog at rest, went rigid and forward-facing, with the precision of satellite dishes locking onto a signal. His breathing, which had been the easy, rhythmic panting of a dog covering trail miles at a comfortable pace, went quiet. Completely quiet. Ryan felt it through the leash before he processed it consciously. The subtle increase in tension as Atlas's body went from companion to instrument. The slight lean forward that meant the dog had identified something in the environment that the human beside him had not yet registered and was now waiting, with the disciplined patience of 7 years of operational training, for the handler to catch up. Ryan stopped walking. The Pacific Crest Trail in the Cascades of northern Oregon was not a place that required tactical thinking on a Tuesday morning in October. That was precisely why Ryan had chosen it. 32 days into a mandatory post-deployment leave that his commanding officer had described as non-negotiable and his therapist had described as essential, Ryan had been running out of ways to occupy a brain that had been trained for 15 years to operate under conditions of sustained threat and had not yet learned to downgrade that setting when the threat was absent. Driving helped. Running helped, sometimes. The trail helped most. The physical demand of elevation gain and rocky footing gave his nervous system enough input that it stopped manufacturing threats to fill the silence. Atlas helped most of all. The dog was 9 years old, which was old for a Malinois and ancient for a military working dog with Atlas's operational history. He carried the math of his service in his body, the white surgical scar along his left shoulder, where a fragment of a mortar round had been removed, in a forward operating base outside Kandahar in 2019, the slight favoring of his right rear leg in cold weather, that the veterinary staff at Naval Station Coronado had documented as degenerative joint changes consistent with high-impact operational work over an extended period, the way his coat had gone slightly grayer at the muzzle in the past 18 months. He had been officially retired from active service 8 months ago. His handler of 6 years, Chief Petty Officer Daniel Reyes, had been medically separated from the Navy, the same month after a traumatic brain injury, sustained in the same operation, that had taken 2 other members of their team. Ryan had taken Atlas home the day of Reyes's medical board. Not because he was ordered to. Because he was there, and because Atlas had looked at him from the kennel at the veterinary facility, with the amber eyes of a dog who understood, in whatever way dogs understood such things, that the person who usually came for him was not coming, and had decided to extend provisional trust to the person who had. That had been 8 months ago. Ryan was still figuring out what they were to each other. Atlas, apparently, had already decided. The leash tension increased by another fraction. Ryan looked up the trail. The path crested a rise about 40 meters ahead, and then dropped into a switchback that wound around the shoulder of a ridge. The tree cover was dense on both sides, Douglas fir and western red cedar, the understory thick with sword fern and Oregon grape, the kind of vegetation that compressed visibility to 20 or 30 meters in any direction. A light mist was moving through the canopy, the remnant of the previous night's rain, and the trail surface was dark with moisture, the packed earth soft enough to hold prints. Ryan looked at Atlas. The dog was staring at the ridgeline with the focused, absolute attention of an animal that had spent 7 years being right. Ryan unclipped the leash. Atlas didn't move forward. He stayed at Ryan's left heel, which was itself information. The dog was not indicating a track, not pulling toward a scent. He was holding position, which meant whatever he had detected was stationary, ahead, and close enough that approach required coordination rather than pursuit. They moved together up the trail. Ryan's breathing shifted without his consciously directing it. Shallower, quieter, the automatic calibration of a body that had spent 15 years entering rooms and spaces where the wrong sound at the wrong moment had consequences. His hands were empty. He was wearing trail clothes, a technical layer under a lightweight shell, hiking pants, boots. No weapon, because this was a public trail in a state park on a Tuesday, and he was on mandatory leave, and his commanding officer had used the specific phrase, normal human activities, in a tone that suggested he was serious. He heard them before he saw them. Voices. Male, multiple. The particular acoustic signature of people who were not concerned about being heard because they were not concerned about consequences. A laugh. The metallic clunk of something heavy being moved in a truck bed. The hiss of a beer can opening. Ryan came over the rise and stopped. The truck was parked across the trail, with the deliberate, territorial positioning of a vehicle placed as a statement rather than out of necessity. A Ford F-250, lifted on aftermarket suspension, the kind of truck that communicated something about its owner's relationship with restraint. The paint was faded, one rear panel replaced with a primer gray door that didn't match. The bed was covered with a green tarp secured with bungee cords. 3 men were arranged around the truck with the loose, proprietary ease of people who had decided this space belonged to them. The one on the tailgate was the largest, 6'2", heavy-set through the shoulders, the kind of physical size that had probably served as a social argument for most of his life. He wore a canvas work jacket over a flannel shirt, construction boots, and had a thick beard that hadn't been maintained in several weeks. A tattoo climbed his neck on the left side, the lower portion of something larger that disappeared beneath his collar. He was holding a beer at 10 in the morning. His name was Carl Briggs. Ryan didn't know that yet. What he knew, from 15 years of reading people in contexts where the reading was the difference between operational success and catastrophic failure, was that Briggs was the decision-maker of the 3, the one whose body language the other 2 were unconsciously mirroring, the one whose stillness or movement would determine the group's response. The second man was leaning against the driver's door. Lean, nervous energy, the fidgety, hair-trigger quality of someone operating on stimulants or anxiety, or both. His eyes had the rapid, scanning quality of a person whose threat assessment was permanently elevated, for reasons that had nothing to do with the trail. The third was sitting on a boulder to the left of the truck, holding an aluminum baseball bat across his knees with the casual familiarity of a man who had carried one long enough that it felt like a natural extension of his body. All 3 of them looked at Ryan when he came over the rise. Then they looked at Atlas. The Malinois had stopped at Ryan's heel, and he was doing the thing that made people who knew dogs nervous and people who didn't know dogs confused. He wasn't growling. He wasn't barking. He was completely, absolutely, unnervingly still, and his amber eyes were fixed on Carl Briggs, with the focused, calculating attention of a predator that had completed its assessment and was now waiting for the situation to develop. "Trail's closed," Carl said. He didn't get off the tailgate. The statement was designed to establish hierarchy without requiring physical effort, the communication of a man who was accustomed to his size, doing the work before his words arrived. "Private use. You and the dog need to go back the way you came." Ryan looked at the trail on the other side of the truck. "It's a public trail," he said. His voice was even. "State park. I just need to pass through." "What you need," Carl said, taking a slow pull from his beer, "is to listen better." The man by the driver's door laughed, a short, sharp sound with no warmth in it. The man on the boulder tapped the bat against his knee twice. Atlas's weight shifted forward by a centimeter. Ryan felt it in his peripheral vision. "I don't want a problem," Ryan said. He kept his posture deliberately relaxed, his hands visible, his weight balanced in the way that looked casual to untrained eyes, and was anything but. "Move the truck forward 10 feet. I walk past, and we're done." Carl hopped off the tailgate. He was heavier standing than he'd looked sitting, the kind of mass that moved with the confidence of a man who had never encountered serious resistance to it. He walked toward Ryan with the slow, measuring stride of someone who was conducting a dominance display and expected it to resolve in his favor. "Nice dog," Carl said. He stopped 8 feet away. His eyes moved over Atlas with an evaluative quality that Ryan recognized and did not like. "What kind is he?" "Belgian Malinois. Military dog? Retired." Carl's mouth curved. "Worth a few grand to the right people. A dog like that." He looked at Ryan. "Empty your pack. Leave the dog. Walk back down." Atlas made a sound. Not a bark. The sound was lower and more continuous than a bark. A subsonic vibration that Ryan felt as much as heard. A sound that came from somewhere in the dog's chest and communicated, without ambiguity or translation required, that the animal producing it had made a professional assessment of the situation and had reached a conclusion. Ryan looked at Carl with the expression he used when he wanted someone to understand, clearly and without ornament, that they had arrived at a decision point. "Last warning," Ryan said quietly. "Move the truck." Carl's face did the thing that faces did when ego encountered an obstacle it hadn't planned for. A brief, authentic flicker of recalculation, suppressed almost immediately by the social pressure of performing certainty in front of an audience. He turned his head toward the man with the bat. "Take the dog," Carl said. The man with the bat stood up. He was 230 pounds, and he moved with the forward-leaning momentum of someone who had done this before and had not yet encountered a situation where it didn't work. He came off the boulder with the bat already rising, a wide, looping swing aimed at creating space between Ryan and the dog, the kind of strike designed to intimidate rather than injure, but capable of either depending on contact. Ryan moved, not backward, forward. The instinct of 15 years of close-quarters combat training was not to retreat from a weapon, but to close with it, to get inside the arc where the leverage disappeared and the weapon became a liability to the person holding it. He stepped in, and to the left, his right arm driving up to intercept the man's forearms before the swing developed its full force, his left hand finding the man's collar. The redirection was not dramatic. It was efficient, the kind of movement that used the attacker's momentum as a resource rather than a problem, channeling it through a pivot that ended with 230 pounds of forward-moving mass going to the ground faster than the ground had been expecting it. The bat hit the dirt 3 feet to Ryan's right. The man hit the dirt face first, the impact producing a sound that was both loud and final, the sound of a body arriving at a surface, with no more ability to resist the arrival. The nervous man by the driver's door shouted something and reached into his jacket. Ryan saw the knife before it was fully extended. A fixed blade, 4-inch, the kind of tool that crossed the line from utility to intent the moment it was drawn in the context of a physical altercation. The man was coming forward, not with the disciplined movement of someone trained in blade work, but with the blind, adrenaline-fueled charge of someone who was scared and had defaulted to escalation as a substitute for a plan. Ryan sidestepped the first thrust with the economical minimalism of someone who had been doing this long enough to know that large movements were wasted movements. He caught the man's knife wrist with his left hand, not gripping but redirecting, the wrist lock applied with the specific pressure that took the joint to its limit, without crossing it, the leverage that controlled without destroying. His right elbow came in a short, horizontal arc to the man's jaw, not full force. Not the strike designed to end consciousness, but the calibrated impact that interrupted the body's ability to continue what it had been doing. The knife went down. The man went down with it, and stayed down, and was breathing. Carl Briggs had not moved. He stood in the middle of the trail, and he looked at his 2 companions on the ground, and then he looked at Ryan, and something passed through his face that Ryan recognized as the specific variety of fear that arrived when a person's model of how the world worked underwent rapid, involuntary revision. Ryan was not breathing hard. His heart rate had elevated during the engagement and was already returning toward baseline. His hands were at his sides. Atlas had not moved from his position. He was still standing at Ryan's left heel, still fixed on Carl, and the sound in his chest had, if anything, become slightly more deliberate. Carl's right hand moved toward his waistband. It was a slow movement, not the snap draw of a trained shooter, but the reluctant, half-committed reach of a man who was considering a tool he had not planned to need this morning and was not certain he was prepared to use. His fingers touched something beneath the jacket hem. Ryan looked at him. "Don't," Ryan said. The word was not a warning in the conventional sense. It did not carry the emotional charge of a threat or the urgency of a command. It was quieter than that, and more final. The specific register of a voice that had said similar words in similar moments, and had never needed to say them twice. Carl's hand stopped. "Put both hands on the hood of the truck," Ryan said. "Now." Carl looked at the dog. Atlas had shifted his weight forward onto his front paws, and his body was arranged in the specific geometry of a Malinois, preparing to cover ground in the shortest possible time, the hindquarters slightly lowered, the chest forward, the eyes fixed with the absolute, professional intensity of an animal that had done this in operational contexts, and would do it again with complete competence and zero hesitation the moment the word arrived. Carl put his hands on the hood of the truck. Ryan moved to him, controlled his hands behind his back, and removed the revolver from his waistband. A .38 caliber, the cylinder loaded. He checked it and put it in his own jacket pocket. He flex-cuffed Carl's wrists with the cuffs he carried on the trail, the way some people carried water, because 15 years of operational experience had produced certain habits that did not suspend themselves for mandatory leave. He was reaching for his phone to call it in, when Atlas did something he had not directed. The dog moved to the truck, not toward Carl, not toward the two men on the ground, but to the truck specifically, to the bed, to the tarp-covered cargo, and he did the thing that Ryan had seen him do in 7 years of operational service, exactly the number of times it needed to matter. He sat down beside the truck bed, upright, composed, facing Ryan with his amber eyes and his perfectly still body. The trained indication for explosives. Ryan looked at the dog. He looked at the truck. He looked at the green tarp secured with bungee cords over whatever was in the bed. He walked to the truck and pulled the corner of the tarp back. Underneath it, stacked in 2 rows of 4, were olive-drab Pelican cases of the type used exclusively for military ordnance transport. Stenciled on the side of the nearest case, partially obscured by a smear of mud but legible, were the letters that made Ryan's chest go cold, in the specific way that operational information made it cold. Not with fear, but with the rapid, comprehensive recalculation of a person who had just understood that the situation they were in was not the situation they had thought they were in. Property of U.S. Department of Defense, explosive ordnance, authorized personnel only. Ryan stood at the side of the truck and looked at the cases and felt Atlas press against his leg, and he thought about 3 things simultaneously, the way his training had taught him to think when the environment changed faster than the plan. He thought about what was in the cases, because Pelican cases of that configuration in that quantity could contain anything from detonators to shaped charges to something considerably worse, and the specific stenciling suggested chain of custody documentation that meant this materiel had come from somewhere with records, which meant someone was looking for it. He thought about Carl Briggs, flex-cuffed against his own truck, who did not have the bearing or the network of a man who could raid a DoD armory, who was a mule, who had been paid to move this to a location where someone else would take delivery. And he thought about the fact that it was 9:51 in the morning, and Carl had been parked on this trail waiting since before Ryan arrived, which meant the delivery window was either open or imminent. He pulled out his phone. No service. The ridge blocked everything. He pulled out the compact satellite communicator he carried on every trail run, because 15 years of operating in places without cell coverage had produced certain habits that did not suspend themselves even on mandatory leave in the Oregon Cascades. He keyed it to the frequency that connected to the Joint Terrorism Task Force Regional Hub in Portland, a frequency he was not supposed to know and absolutely knew, and transmitted the location coordinates, the DoD case stenciling he had photographed with his phone camera, and 3 words that the people on the other end of that frequency understood completely. Active, imminent, expedite. He pocketed the communicator and looked at Atlas. The dog was watching the tree line. His ears had rotated again, not toward the trail they had come from, but toward the access road below the ridge, the fire road that connected to the county highway 3 miles south, and the sound he was making was different now. Not the chest vibration of an alert on a stationary target. This was the alert Ryan had heard in Kandahar, in Mosul, in a valley in Helmand province, where the intelligence had said 2 vehicles, and the intelligence had been wrong. Multiple vehicles. Moving. Getting closer. Ryan looked at the flex-cuffed men on the ground. He looked at Carl against the truck. He looked at the cases in the bed, and the trail behind him, and the tree line in front. He looked at Atlas. The dog looked back with the amber patience of an animal that had been here before, in different geography, with the same essential geometry, and knew exactly what came next. Okay, Ryan said quietly. Atlas stood up. The sound of engines was coming up the mountain now. Not the single vehicle of a casual visitor, but the layered, overlapping acoustic signature of multiple heavy platforms moving in convoy formation up a grade. The kind of sound that carried through mountain air with a clarity that left no room for misinterpretation. Whoever had sent Carl Briggs to hold the merchandise was coming to collect it, and they were 60 seconds away. Ryan moved in the next 10 seconds, with the compressed efficiency of a man who had learned that the difference between a plan and a crisis was usually measured in the time it took to execute the first 3 actions correctly. He dragged Carl Briggs off the trail and into the fern understory on the east side of the truck, not gently, not with concern for Carl's comfort, but with the minimum force required to move a cuffed 200-pound man 12 feet in under 15 seconds. Carl's knees hit roots. He grunted. Ryan didn't acknowledge it. He went back for the man with the knife, still conscious, holding his jaw, cooperative in the specific way that people became cooperative when the alternative had already been demonstrated, and flex-cuffed him beside Carl. The man with the bat was still on the ground, breathing steadily, not going anywhere without assistance. Ryan pulled the tarp back over the pelican cases and resecured 2 of the bungee cords. Not perfectly. There wasn't time for perfect, but enough that a fast scan of the truck bed from distance would show cargo covered and undisturbed. He looked at the trail. The access road that connected to the fire road below was not visible from this position, but the sound of the engines had clarified over the past 40 seconds into something more specific. 2 vehicles. The exhaust note was heavy, not the thin buzz of civilian SUVs, but the lower, more deliberate sound of platforms carrying weight. Armored paneling added mass. Mass changed the acoustic signature. Ryan had learned to read engine sounds the way other people read road signs, and what he was reading now said these vehicles were not loaded with people who were coming to this mountain for the hiking. He looked at Atlas. The dog was already watching the tree line below the ridgeline, his body oriented toward the fire road with the stillness of an instrument that had acquired its signal and was now simply reporting. Ryan made the calculation. 6 men was the typical configuration for a 2-vehicle PMC team executing a materiel transfer. 4 operators and 2 drivers, with the drivers remaining with the vehicles during the exchange. If this was a professional outfit, they would approach the truck, verify the cargo, load the cases into their own vehicles, and disengage within 8 to 10 minutes. They would have a security perimeter, 2 men on the flanks, 1 forward, 1 on the cargo while the loading happened. They would be armed with something considerably more serious than a .38 revolver and a baseball bat. Ryan had a .38 revolver with 5 rounds, a fixed-blade knife, a satellite communicator that had already transmitted, and a 9-year-old Belgian Malinois with a surgical scar on his shoulder and 17 confirmed operational deployments. The task force response time from his coordinates was a minimum of 22 minutes. He had, at most, 3. Ryan moved to the boulder cluster on the east side of the trail, a natural rock formation that the geology of the ridge had arranged into a position that any military mind would immediately identify as tactically advantageous. Elevated by 4 feet above the trail surface. Dense cedar cover on 3 sides. Clear sightline down the switchback approach. Far enough from the truck that a fast visual scan from the arriving vehicles would not land on it immediately. He climbed up and pressed himself against the largest rock, using the cedar branches to break his outline, and pulled Atlas up beside him. The dog settled without instruction, lying flat against the rock surface with his paws tucked, his sandy brown coat immediately becoming part of the texture of the lichen-covered granite, in the way that Malinois coats had always seemed designed by something more than genetics. They waited. The first vehicle came around the lower switchback at 10:03 a.m. It was a matte black GMC Yukon XL, with aftermarket suspension, and what Ryan's eye identified in the first second as discrete armor plating. The subtle squaring of the wheel wells, the slight additional height of the door panels, the way the vehicle sat on its suspension, with the heavier, more deliberate movement of something that weighed considerably more than its factory specification. The windows were tinted to the legal limit and then past it. No plates on the front. The second vehicle was identical. They moved in a loose tactical interval, Not the civilian habit of following too close, but the professional spacing of a convoy that had practiced it. Both vehicles stopped 20 yards from Carl's truck. The doors opened. Ryan counted. 6 men. They exited with the synchronized, low-profile efficiency of people who had practiced vehicle egress in operational contexts. Doors opening simultaneously, bodies moving to cover positions immediately, weapons coming up to ready, without the theatrics of people who were performing readiness, rather than implementing it. Suppressed rifles. Plate carriers under neutral-colored jackets. The kind of gear that cost more than Carl Briggs made in a year, and came from procurement channels that did not involve civilian retail. The team leader was easy to identify. He was the first one to move away from the vehicles, the first one to break the initial security perimeter, the one whose movement the others tracked unconsciously. Tall, late 40s, silver-bearded, the kind of physical presence that came not from size but from economy. A man who moved like someone who had spent decades removing everything unnecessary from his body language. He wore his plate carrier the way men wore it when they had worn it long enough that it felt like a second skin. He walked to Carl's truck, scanned it, looked at the covered cargo in the bed, and then turned in a slow, controlled arc to survey the surrounding terrain. Ryan pressed flat against the rock. Atlas did not move. The team leader's scan passed over their position and continued. Ryan breathed. "Deliveries here," the team leader said into his radio. His voice carried in the mountain air with the practiced projection of a man accustomed to communicating in environments where ambient noise was a factor. "Cargo appears intact. Where's the contact?" He waited. No answer, because Carl Briggs was 15 feet into the fern understory, with his wrists behind his back, and the 2 men flanking him were not in a position to respond to radio queries. The team leader's posture changed by a degree that was invisible to anyone not trained to read it. His weight shifted slightly forward. His head moved in the specific way it moved when a professional was reclassifying a situation. He raised a fist. The 5 other men stopped moving simultaneously. "Contact is absent," the team leader said. "Security posture." He made a hand signal. 2 men broke from the group and moved toward the tree line on the west side of the trail, the opposite side from Ryan's position. 2 more took flanking positions on either side of the truck. The remaining man stayed with the vehicles. "Spread the search. Find the locals. Nobody touches the cargo until we have eyes on everyone involved." Ryan watched the 2 men enter the tree line on the west side and felt the specific compressed clarity that arrived when a situation reached the point where the options had reduced to a number that was manageable. He had perhaps 12 minutes before the task force arrived. He had 6 men, 2 of whom were currently moving away from the central position and into terrain where they would become harder to track. The team leader was standing between the 2 vehicles with 1 man, and 2 more were on the truck flanks. If the 2 searching men found Carl and the others in the fern understory, the situation would escalate to a level that a .38 revolver and a Malinois could not manage. The task force needed to arrive into a contained situation, not an active firefight involving stolen military ordnance and 6 armed contractors. Ryan looked at Atlas. The dog's eyes were already on him. Ryan gave 3 hand signals, the compressed vocabulary of 7 years of operational partnership. The signals said, "Right flank, distraction, hold." Atlas looked at the signals. His ears moved. His head tilted by a fraction of a degree, in the way it tilted when he was processing something complex and arriving at understanding. Then he looked back at Ryan, with the amber eyes that said what they always said. "Ready." Ryan slid off the back of the boulder, in the direction away from the trail, using the rock itself to mask his movement from the team leader's position. He moved through the cedar understory in a low crouch, placing each foot with the toe-first, weight-rolling technique that minimized sound on the leaf-covered mountain floor. He worked 40 yards east along the ridgeline before angling back toward the trail, putting him on the opposite side of Carl's truck from the team leader's position. He found a cedar trunk with enough diameter to use as cover and pressed against it. Through the gap between the tree and a neighboring fir, he could see the truck, the 2 vehicles, and the team leader standing between them with his radio in one hand and his rifle at a low ready. One of the flank men had moved to the truck bed and was lifting the corner of the tarp. Ryan gave the signal. It was a low, 2-tone whistle. the kind of sound the mountain made on its own, almost. A sound that human ears processed as ambient, and dog ears processed as precise instruction. Atlas, still on the boulder 40 yards away, heard it. What happened next lasted 4 seconds and completely reorganized the tactical situation. Atlas came off the rock on the far side, away from the trail, and ran a wide arc through the tree line at a speed that the terrain should not have permitted and that Ryan had stopped being surprised by after the first operational deployment. The dog was not coming toward the men. He was going around them, using the dense fur understory to mask his movement, covering ground with the absolute silence that had made Malinois the preferred working dog of special operations units across every branch. He emerged from the tree line 60 yards below the vehicles. He barked once. Loud, sharp, directional. The specific bark Ryan had trained as a misdirection signal. Not the operational bark, but the civilian dog bark. The sound of a loose animal in the woods that drew human attention the way a flare drew eyes. Automatically and completely. Every head turned. Ryan moved. He came out of the cedar cover at a sprint, closing the 20 yards to the nearest flank man before the man had finished turning back from the sound. The engagement lasted 2 seconds. A controlled takedown using the man's own rotation against him. The arm bar applied with the precision of someone who had trained it 10,000 times and used it in conditions considerably less forgiving than a mountain trail in October. The man went face down into the trail surface. Ryan had his rifle clear of his body before the man registered what had happened. The second flank man turned, and Ryan was already moving. Not toward him, but laterally, using the truck as cover, the truck now between himself and the team leader's position. The flank man raised his rifle, and Ryan threw a rock, a fist-sized piece of granite from the trail surface, thrown hard and accurately at the man's rifle optic from 12 feet. It hit the scope housing with a crack that the man's hands felt as impact shock, the weapon involuntarily lowering in the fraction-second response that hands made before the brain overrode them. It was enough. Ryan closed the distance. The takedown was cleaner than the first one, because the man was already off balance, already in the process of recovering from the optic impact. And a man recovering his footing was a man whose weight was in transition between positions and could be redirected with a fraction of the force required against a planted stance. He went down. Ryan controlled his descent enough to prevent the rifle from discharging on impact, stripped the weapon from him, and was up and moving before the team leader at the vehicles had fully processed what he was seeing. The team leader processed it faster than most. He raised his rifle. "Don't move," the team leader said. His voice was calm. The voice of a professional who had been in situations where things had gone wrong and had learned to bring his register down rather than up when they did. "Hands where I see them." Ryan stopped. He was standing in the open between the truck and the vehicles with a rifle he had taken from an unconscious man and a .38 in his jacket pocket, and the team leader had a suppressed MK-18 at a high ready with the practiced grip of someone who had been using that platform operationally for long enough that the muscle memory was structural. Ryan put the rifle down on the trail surface, slowly, both hands visible. "Kick it away," the team leader said. Ryan kicked it. The team leader advanced, keeping his weapon on Ryan, his eyes moving in the controlled pattern of a professional, checking his environment without losing primary focus. He was good. Ryan could see it in every movement, the footwork, the spacing he maintained, the way he never let his muzzle cross his own body. Dishonorably discharged from something elite, Ryan guessed. The bearing never entirely left. "Who are you?" the team leader asked. "Hiker," Ryan said. The team leader looked at the two men on the ground. He looked at Ryan. He looked at the flex-cuffed man he could now see in the fern understory, visible because Carl had shifted and disturbed the vegetation. His jaw tightened. "Who are you actually?" he said. From the team leader's left, without sound, without warning of any kind, Atlas came out of the tree line at a dead run. The dog had completed his loop. He had heard the exchange. He had made his own assessment in the way that Atlas made assessments, completely, accurately, and without hesitation. He covered the 15 yards between the tree line and the team leader in just over a second. At 9 years old, with a surgically repaired shoulder and joint changes documented in his veterinary file, Atlas ran like a dog who had been told his age and had disagreed with the conclusion. He did not go for the rifle arm. He went for the center of mass, the chest strike that Ryan had seen him execute in 3 operational theaters. The kinetic impact that was less about bite and more about physics, about putting 200 foot-pounds of moving Malinois into a target's center of gravity at a speed that the target's vestibular system could not compensate for in time. The team leader went back. Not down, back, the rifle coming up and away from Ryan, as the dog's momentum transferred through the impact, and in the half-second that the weapon was elevated and the team leader's balance was compromised, Ryan was already moving. He closed the distance in 2 steps and took the rifle with the grip break technique that stripped it from hands that were occupied with not falling rather than holding on. He had the weapon in his own hands and was stepping back before the team leader regained his footing, and Atlas had shifted from the impact to the bite, locking onto the man's right forearm with the full mouth hold of a dog who had been trained to hold until told otherwise and intended to do exactly that. The team leader did not try to fight the dog. He was a professional. He had been in situations where a working dog had locked onto a limb, and he understood the arithmetic of that situation, that fighting the bite increased the damage and accomplished nothing, and that the human who had just taken his rifle was standing 8 feet away with it at a ready position, and the particular stillness of someone who knew how to use it. He went still. Atlas held. Ryan looked at the man on the ground, the team leader, who was lying on his back with a Malinois on his forearm and the specific expression of a person recalculating their morning, and then looked toward the remaining contractor he hadn't accounted for, the one who had stayed with the vehicles. The man was standing beside the lead Yukon with both hands raised. He had put his rifle on the hood of the vehicle at some point in the past 30 seconds, apparently having made his own assessment of the situation. He looked at Ryan, at the dog, at his team leader on the ground, and then back at Ryan. "I'm just the driver," he said. Ryan kept the rifle on him. "Hands on the vehicle, don't move." The man put his hands on the vehicle and didn't move. Ryan keyed his satellite communicator one-handed. "Mercer, transmitting update. 6 tangos, all contained. Cargo secure. Expedite still required." He paused. "And advise responding units that there is a friendly K9 on site. Belgian Malinois. Retired service animal. He is on a bite hold and will not release until I command it. Make sure your people understand that before they come up the mountain." He lowered the communicator and looked at Atlas, who was maintaining his hold with the professional patience of a dog who had been here before and knew that hold until told was not a suggestion. "Good boy," Ryan said. Atlas's tail moved once. A single, brief sweep, the minimum acknowledgement of a dog who was in the middle of a task and would celebrate appropriately when the task was complete. The team leader, his forearm locked in the dog's grip, turned his head toward Ryan. His face had settled into something that was beyond anger and past fear. The flat, resigned expression of a man who had made a series of decisions over a period of years that had led him to this specific patch of Oregon mountain trail on this specific morning, and who was now in the process of understanding that the account was being settled. "You said you were a hiker," the team leader said. "I was," Ryan said. "Then your guys tried to take my dog." The team leader looked at Atlas. "What's his name?" he asked. It was a strange question under the circumstances. The question of a man who had worked with dogs long enough that the instinct to know their names had survived everything else. "Atlas," Ryan said. The team leader looked at the dog for a moment with the expression that men who had served looked at working dogs. Not as animals, but as something more specific. Something that the language of civilian life did not have a precise word for. Recognition, maybe. The acknowledgement of a particular kind of service. "How old?" he asked. 9, Ryan said. The team leader's expression shifted by a fraction. "He shouldn't be this fast at 9, he said. "No," Ryan agreed. "He shouldn't." From below the ridge, the sound of the mountain changed. The deep, organized rumble of multiple heavy vehicles moving up the fire road at speed. The intermittent tone of an emergency beacon carrying through the morning air. The specific acoustic signature of a response that had been expedited. The task force was 4 minutes out. Ryan looked at the contained situation around him. 6 men, 2 unconscious, 3 flex-cuffed, 1 held by a dog, and a driver with his hands on a vehicle hood, and then looked at the pelican cases in the truck bed and thought about what was in them, and where they had come from, and how many people Carl Briggs had moved them for before today. And he thought about Atlas, who had detected the cases from 30 feet away through a tarp and a truck bed, who had told him with the simple, unambiguous language of a trained indication that something was wrong long before the situation had revealed itself to be wrong. 9 years old. A surgical scar on his shoulder. Joint changes in the veterinary file. Mandatory retirement from active service. Ryan looked at the dog holding a disgraced contractor on an Oregon mountain trail and thought about the word retired and what it meant and what, apparently, it did not mean. The vehicles were coming up the mountain now, close enough that Ryan could hear the individual engine notes separating from the convoy rumble. Atlas could hear them too. His ears had rotated toward the sound without releasing his hold. The multitasking of a working dog who processed parallel inputs without losing focus on the primary task. Ryan put his hand on the dog's back. Atlas's tail moved again, slightly longer this time. The morning mist was burning off the canopy above them, the October light coming through the firs in long, angled shafts that found the trail surface, and the truck, and the scattered personnel of a materiel transfer that had not gone the way anyone involved had planned. Somewhere in those Pelican cases was the reason 6 trained contractors had driven 2 armored vehicles up a mountain access road. Somewhere in a federal database were the serial numbers that would tell the task force where those cases had come from and how they had gotten here and who else was in the network that had moved them. And somewhere in the communication record of a joint terrorism task force hub in Portland was a transmission from a satellite communicator that had been sent by a man on mandatory leave who had been taking his retired military working dog for a trail run on a Tuesday in October and had, in the span of 40 minutes, contained a situation that the responding federal assets were now driving up a mountain to find already resolved. Ryan thought about what his commanding officer was going to say. He thought about the phrase, normal human activities. He looked at Atlas. The dog looked back with the amber patience of an animal who had absolutely no concept of mandatory leave and could not understand why the concept was relevant to anything that had happened this morning. The first task force vehicle came around the lower switchback. The first vehicle that came around the switchback was a Bearcat, the armored personnel carrier that federal tactical units used when the word expedite arrived, attached to coordinates and DoD stenciling. It was followed by 3 dark SUVs moving in tight formation, and behind those, a marked Oregon State Police unit that had been the closest responding asset when the task force scrambled. Ryan stood in the middle of the trail with the team leader's rifle at a low ready and watched them come. Atlas released his hold when Ryan gave the command. A single quiet word, the release that 7 years of operational work had made as automatic as breathing, and stepped back from the team leader with the composed, unhurried manner of a dog who had completed a task to his own satisfaction. He came to Ryan's left heel and sat, and his amber eyes moved from the arriving vehicles to Ryan's face and back, reading the situation the way he always read it, through the handler first and the environment second. The Bearcat stopped 20 yards out, the SUV doors opened, and federal agents came out in the organized, purposeful deployment of people who had been told what they were responding to and were now confirming that the information matched the reality. They moved to the vehicles, to the men on the ground, to the truck bed, calling out positions and status to each other, in the clipped language of a team executing a containment protocol. A man in a tactical vest, with FBI across the chest, in yellow letters, came toward Ryan. He was mid-40s, broad, with the specific watchfulness of a senior agent who had been doing this long enough that his first priority at every scene was understanding what had happened before he decided what to do next. He looked at Ryan. He looked at the 2 unconscious men on the trail. He looked at the team leader sitting on the ground with his back against the Yukon, cradling his forearm, and at the flex-cuffed men in the understory, and at the driver still standing with his hands on the hood of the lead vehicle, because nobody had told him to move, and he had decided that not moving was the safest available option. He looked back at Ryan. "Mercer," he said. "Yes. Special Agent Tom Carver, JTF Portland." He looked at the contained scene around him with the expression of a man recalibrating his expectations. "We expedited based on your transmission. I expected to arrive into an active situation. It was active, Ryan said. It's less active now. Carver looked at Atlas. The dog was sitting at Ryan's heel, with the composed, professional stillness of an animal at rest between tasks. His coat damp from the morning mist, the white scar on his shoulder catching the light that was now coming fully through the canopy as the overcast burned off. The K9 in your transmission, Carver said. Atlas. Retired Naval Special Warfare Working Dog. 9 years, 17 operational deployments. He indicated on the cargo before I got eyes on it. Carver looked at the truck bed. 2 of his agents were already photographing the Pelican cases, working carefully around them without touching. A 3rd was on a radio, reading the stenciled serial numbers into a federal database query. Do you know what's in them? Carver asked. No. Atlas indicated explosive ordnance. The stenciling confirms DoD origin. Specifics are above my current information. Carver nodded. He turned and called to the agent on the radio. Vasquez, what are we getting on those serials? The agent, a woman, sharp-featured, working 2 radio channels simultaneously, held up one finger without turning around, the gesture of a person who was receiving information and needed 10 more seconds. Then she turned. Cases match a serial block from a reported theft at a National Guard armory in Idaho, she said. 8 months ago. Theft was classified at the time. Public record shows a break-in. No detail on what was taken. She paused. These cases contain M112 demolition charges. 16 per case. 8 cases. That's 128 charges, Agent Carver. The trail went quiet in the specific way it went quiet when information arrived that reorganized everything around it. Ryan did the math. C4 demolition blocks, military grade. 128 of them represented a quantity that was not about individual criminal use. That was infrastructure. That was a number that implied a target with scale. Carver turned to look at the team leader on the ground. The man had his eyes closed, leaning back against the Yukon with his injured forearm across his chest. He had the settled look of a man who had decided that the situation had concluded and was now waiting for whatever came next, with the patience of someone who had been through this process before and knew that fighting it at this stage accomplished nothing. His name, Carver said. Ryan said, I don't have confirmed ID. Former military, force recon bearing, dishonorably discharged based on the PMC setup and the operational methodology. The 2 men in the understory were the delivery contacts. Local. He was the collection team. Carver crouched in front of the team leader. I'm going to need a name, he said. The team leader opened his eyes. David Corrigan, he said. His voice was level. Formerly gunnery sergeant. 2nd Force Reconnaissance Company. You'll find a federal file. I'm sure we will, Carver said. He stood and looked at Ryan. Lieutenant Commander, I'm going to need a full statement. On site first, then at the Portland field office. He paused. You're on leave. I was on a trail run, Ryan said, with a retired military working dog. He needed the exercise. Carver looked at Atlas again. The dog had shifted his attention to the Pelican cases, where 2 agents were now carefully opening the nearest one, with the specific, practiced methodology of people who worked around explosive ordnance with professional regularity. Atlas watched them work with the focused attention of a dog who had opinions about proper ordnance handling procedure and was monitoring for deviations. He indicated from distance, Carver said, through the tarp and the truck bed. He indicated before I had visual on the truck, Ryan said. From the trail, before the crest, approximately 40 meters. Carver was quiet for a moment. The armory theft investigation has been open for 8 months, he said. We knew the materiel was moving, but we couldn't find the distribution chain. We had no actionable lead. He looked at the dog. A 9-year-old retired Malinois on a Tuesday trail run gave us the distribution chain. He's been doing things like that for 7 years, Ryan said. Carver almost smiled. Buy him a steak, he said, and turned to his team. The statement took 2 hours on site and 3 more at the Portland field office. Ryan sat in a conference room with a federal recorder on the table and gave every detail in the sequential, precise format that operational after-action reports had trained him to use. Timeline, observations, decisions, actions, outcomes. He described Atlas's initial indication on the trail. He described the 3 men, The engagement, the flex cuffs. He described the satellite transmission, the team leader's arrival, the second engagement, and Atlas's bite hold on David Corrigan. The federal attorney across the table had a yellow legal pad covered in notes by the time Ryan finished. The dog's indication will be entered into the chain of evidence, she said. His operational record, his certification history, his indication training documentation. We'll need all of it from the Naval Special Warfare Command. I can get that, Ryan said. The indication itself, the initial alert on the concealed ordnance. That's the foundation of the entire probable cause chain. She tapped her pen against the pad. Without that indication, you were just a man who got into a fight with 3 people in the woods and then found something in a truck. With the indication, we have a certified military explosive detection asset, identifying concealed DoD ordnance. That's the difference between a clean federal case and a suppression hearing. Ryan understood. Atlas hadn't just helped him that morning. Atlas had built the legal architecture that would make the prosecution work. Carver came in at the 4-hour mark with coffee that Ryan did not refuse, and information he had been waiting for. Corrigan is talking, Carver said, sitting down. Partially. Enough. He was contracted through a private broker, operating out of Vancouver. Canadian side. The Idaho theft was one of 3. There are 2 more serial blocks unaccounted for. Separate locations. He paused. We have names from Corrigan's communication records. The investigation is going to go wide. Federal, multi-jurisdictional, probably international involvement given the broker location. The target, Ryan said. Carver looked at him. Corrigan doesn't know the final target. He was logistics. He moved materiel and didn't ask questions about destination, because asking questions about destination was how people in his business ended conversations permanently. He set his coffee down. But the quantity, 128 M112 charges, combined with what we assess is still in circulation from the other 2 thefts, that's not improvised use. That's planned. Large scale. And we now have a thread to pull. Because of the indication. Because of the dog, Carver said. Honestly, Lieutenant Commander, 9 years old, surgically repaired shoulder, retired status. He should have been sleeping on a couch in Coronado. Ryan thought about what that would look like. Atlas on a couch, the amber eyes watching the door, waiting for something that the official paperwork said was no longer coming. He thought about the way the dog had pressed against his leg in the parking lot of the veterinary facility 8 months ago, extending trust to a stranger, because the person who usually came was not coming, and the dog had assessed the situation and made a decision. He doesn't know he's retired, Ryan said. Carver nodded slowly. No, he said. I don't suppose he does. Ryan's commanding officer called at 7 p.m. Captain Harris had a voice that Ryan associated with 2 modes. The operational mode, which was precise and fast, and the mode he used when he was choosing his words with a specific care that indicated something significant had arrived at his desk. He was in the second mode. I've been on the phone with JTF Portland for the past 2 hours, Harris said. Ryan waited. They are describing a scene in which a Navy SEAL on mandatory medical leave. Mandatory. Mercer. The word I used was non-negotiable. Single-handedly contained 6 armed private military contractors, prevented the distribution of 128 military demolition charges, and provided the probable cause foundation for a federal investigation that is now touching a cross-border arms network. I was on a trail run, Ryan said. Harris was quiet for 3 seconds. I'm also told that a retired military working dog in your custody provided the initial explosive indication that initiated the sequence of events. Atlas indicated first, Ryan said. I followed. Another pause. The kind that Harris used when he was deciding between 2 responses, and the deciding was genuine. The JTF is formally requesting your cooperation with the ongoing investigation. That request has been approved by SOCOM. Your leave has been administratively reclassified. Harris paused. You're not in trouble, Mercer, but I need to ask you something directly. Sir, are you all right? The question sat in the phone call with the particular weight of a question asked by someone who meant it precisely and was waiting for an honest answer. Ryan looked across the conference room to where Atlas was lying under the table, his head on his paws, his eyes moving between Ryan's face and the door. The dog was tired. Ryan could see it in the way he was holding himself, the slight heaviness around the eyes, the way his injured shoulder had stiffened in the hours since the trail. 9 years old, surgically repaired, 17 operational deployments, and one Tuesday morning in October that had turned into something the paperwork would describe as significant. The dog looked up at Ryan. The amber eyes were calm and certain and entirely present, and they communicated the same thing they had communicated in Kandahar and Mosul, and a valley in Helmand province, and a veterinary parking lot 8 months ago, when Ryan had come instead of Reyes, and the dog had made a decision about trust. "I'm better than I was 32 days ago," Ryan said. Harris considered that. "That's honest," he said. "Atlas needed the exercise," Ryan said. Harris made a sound that was not quite a laugh, but was its structural neighbor. "Get the dog seen by a veterinarian tonight. His shoulder." "Already scheduled," Ryan said. The JATF medical team looked at him on site. "No new damage. He's stiff. He's 9 years old, and he just took down a former Force Recon gunny," Harris said. "He did," Ryan said. "By a mistake, Mercer. That's the second time someone has said that to me today." Harris hung up. Ryan looked at Atlas under the table. "You heard that," Ryan said. Atlas's tail moved once against the conference room floor. They drove back toward the coast that night, the way they had driven out 3 days ago. No destination, no plan, just the road and the truck and the company. But it felt different now, the way the inside of a space felt different, when the pressure had equalized, when something that had been held under compression had finally found its level. Atlas was in the passenger seat. He had not been in the passenger seat on the drive out. He had been in the back, which was his designated position, and the one that regulations technically required, and that Ryan had never once enforced, because the dog rode better with a window view, and because Ryan had stopped caring about the regulations. That didn't matter, somewhere around deployment 14. The dog's head was out the window, not all the way, just enough that the wind caught his ears and moved them, the loose, unguarded movement of an animal that was not currently working and knew it, and was willing to be, for this window of miles, something that existed without purpose, other than the wind and the speed and the person beside him. Ryan drove. He thought about Daniel Corrigan telling him the dog shouldn't be that fast at 9. He thought about what Atlas had been before the retirement papers, and the surgical report, and the veterinary file, and the administrative language that said service concluded, asset transferred to handler custody. He thought about what the dog still was, apparently, regardless of what the paperwork said. He thought about Chief Petty Officer Daniel Reyes, who had worked with Atlas for 6 years, and who was in a neurological rehabilitation facility in San Diego learning, with the particular slow courage of a man who had been told the damage was permanent, and had decided to discuss that conclusion with the damage directly, how to reconstruct the functions that the TBI had interrupted. Ryan had visited twice since taking Atlas home. The second visit, Reyes had looked at the photos Ryan had brought on his phone. Atlas on the trail, Atlas at the beach, Atlas in the passenger seat with his head out the window, and had said something that Ryan had been carrying since. He always needed to be working, Reyes had said. Even at rest, he needed to know the work was still there. He had looked at the photos for a long time. "You're the work now, Mercer. You understand? For him, you're the mission." Ryan thought about that on the coast highway, with the Pacific appearing and disappearing on his left between the headlands, the black water and the night sky, nearly indistinguishable at the horizon. He thought about what it meant to be someone's mission. He thought about 32 days of mandatory leave, and the nightmares that had started in Helmand province, and had relocated to a Norfolk apartment without difficulty. He thought about 3 weeks of driving in circles, and the trail run that had not been a trail run, and the dog that had known something was wrong before the trail crested. He thought about what Atlas had done that morning. Not just the indication, not just the engagement, but all of it. The whole arc of it, from the initial alert on the path, to the bite hold in the clearing, to sitting under the conference room table, while Ryan gave a federal statement, calm and present, and completely, unambiguously himself. 9 years old, a scar on his shoulder, retired, still working. Ryan reached over without taking his eyes off the road and put his hand on the dog's back. Atlas pulled his head in from the window and looked at him. The amber eyes in the dark cab, steady and warm, and entirely without the complicated weight that human eyes carried. The clean animal certainty of a creature that knew exactly what it was and exactly where it belonged. Ryan kept his hand on the dog's back and drove. The investigation ran for 7 months. David Corrigan cooperated in exchange for consideration and gave the JTF the broker's network structure. The 2 remaining stolen serial blocks were recovered in separate operations in British Columbia and Nevada, and the federal case eventually touched 11 individuals across 3 countries. The Idaho armory theft, the distribution chain, the planned end use. None of it became public in any specific form, because SOCOM requested a classification level that kept the details from the news cycle, and the news cycle complied, as it generally did when the request came from the right letterhead. Ryan testified in federal court in March. He wore his uniform. He described Atlas's indication in the sequential, precise language of an operational report, and the federal attorney entered Atlas's full certification record and operational history into evidence without objection. When the defense attorney suggested on cross-examination that a 9-year-old retired dog with documented joint damage might not constitute a reliable explosive detection asset, Ryan looked at the attorney with the expression he used when he wanted someone to understand something clearly and without additional discussion. Atlas has a 100% detection rate across 17 operational deployments over 7 years, Ryan said. He has never failed to indicate on confirmed ordnance and has never produced a false positive. His age and his retirement status are administrative designations. His nose works the same way it worked on deployment. It will work the same way until it stops working. It has not stopped working. The attorney did not ask a follow-up question. Carver called Ryan when the verdicts came in. Guilty. All 11 counts, across the defendants. He called because he had said he would, and because Ryan had asked him to, and because Carver was the kind of federal agent who understood that the people who built the foundations of cases deserved to know when the cases concluded. "Tell the dog," Carver said. "I'll let him know," Ryan said. Atlas was lying in the sun on the back deck when Ryan came out after the call. He was in the specific posture of a dog maximizing warmth, flat on his side, legs extended. The full surface area of his coat presented to the afternoon light. His eyes were half closed. The white scar on his shoulder was visible against the darker coat, and the joint in his right rear leg had the slight stiffness that the veterinarian had said would be permanent and manageable, and was. Ryan sat down on the step beside him. Atlas opened one eye. "It's done," Ryan said. The dog closed the eye. His tail moved twice on the deck boards. Slow, deliberate sweeps. The wag of an animal who had heard something worth acknowledging, and had acknowledged it in the minimum number of gestures required. Ryan put his hand on the dog's side, feeling the rise and fall of the breathing, steady and slow in the afternoon warmth. 9 years old. A retired service animal, officially. The paperwork said so. The administrative record said so. The veterinary file, with its documented joint changes, and its surgical history said so. Atlas's tail moved one more time and was still. Ryan left his hand there, feeling the warmth and the breathing, and the particular aliveness of an animal that had spent its whole life moving toward what needed to be found, and had not yet, despite what the paperwork said, found any reason to stop. The sun came through the firs at the edge of the property in long, flat shafts, the way it came through firs in Oregon in the afternoon, when the season was turning, and the deck was warm, and the dog was breathing, and somewhere in the Pacific Northwest, a trail was quiet again. The work was done, for now, and the dog, as always, would know when it wasn't.